She thought it was a normal pregnancy, then doctors saw the baby's face. Who is the baby and why is this anything but normal? To find out, watch to the end. But first, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss stories like this again. Maggie's life had always been meticulously planned. At 32, she was living the life she envisioned since her teenage years. A cozy suburban home, a stable job as an elementary school teacher, and a husband, Ethan, who adored her. When they decided it was finally time to expand their family, Maggie felt ready to embark on the next chapter of her life. The pregnancy was uneventful at first. Morning sickness came and went like a rite of passage. Her cravings were the usual odd combinations. Pickles and peanut butter, anyone? And her ultrasounds were met with reassuring smiles from her obstetrician, Dr. Lin. By the second trimester, Maggie had fully embraced the glow of impending motherhood, spending hours picking out baby names, decorating the nursery, and imagining the kind of mother she wanted to be. Ethan, ever the pragmatist, made spreadsheets to track expenses, researched parenting classes, and obsessed over the safest car seats. It was at the 20-week anatomy scan that the first whispers of concern began to stir. Dr. Lin had spent a little too long staring at the screen. Her normally cheerful demeanor was replaced with a tight-lipped concentration as she clicked through measurements and asked Maggie to shift slightly for a better angle. "Is everything okay?" Maggie had asked, her voice tinged with worry. Dr. Lin hesitated, a pause that stretched into eternity. "The baby's development is measuring a little behind schedule," she said carefully. "It's nothing to panic about, but I'd like to send you for a more detailed scan at the maternal fetal medicine clinic, just to be thorough." Maggie left the appointment feeling uneasy, but Ethan was quick to reassure her. "Doctors are just being extra cautious," he said, squeezing her hand. "You know how they are. It's probably nothing." But as the weeks passed, Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The follow-up scans revealed more discrepancies, abnormalities in the baby's bone structure, a slight misalignment in the facial features. Specialists began using words like craniofacial dysplasia and genetic testing. By the third trimester, Maggie's excitement had given way to a constant undercurrent of dread. The day of the delivery was supposed to be joyous. Maggie's labor was long but uneventful, and as the hours passed, she clung to the hope that all the doctor's warnings would prove unfounded, that her baby would arrive healthy and perfect, just like in her dreams. But when the baby was born, the room fell unnervingly silent. Maggie's first glimpse of her son was like a jolt of electricity. His skin was pale and translucent, stretched tightly over prominent bones. His head was elongated, his eyes unusually large and sunken, his mouth set in an unnatural grimace. The resemblance to a fictional character, Smeagol, from a movie she had barely thought about in years, was so immediate and uncanny that Maggie felt her breath hitch. What's wrong with him?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Ethan stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock as a nurse quickly wrapped the baby in a blanket and whisked him away. Dr. Lin placed a hand on Maggie's arm, her face heavy with empathy. "Your baby has a rare craniofacial condition," she said gently. "We'll need to run more tests to understand the full scope, but for now, just focus on recovering. He's stable, and that's the most important thing." Stable. The word felt like a cruel consolation prize. In the days that followed, Maggie and Ethan were plunged into a whirlwind of medical jargon, consultations with specialists, and well-meaning but painfully rehearsed reassurances from hospital staff. The official diagnosis was Treacher-Collins syndrome, a genetic disorder that affected the development of bones and tissues in the face. It wasn't life-threatening, but it would define every aspect of their son's life. They named him Samuel. The first weeks at home were a blur of sleepless nights, feeding struggles, and an avalanche of emotions that Maggie struggled to untangle. She loved Samuel fiercely, but there were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when she felt a stab of resentment, a yearning for the child she had imagined instead of the one she had. The guilt was crushing. Ethan, too, was struggling. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office and coming home exhausted and irritable. When he was around, his interactions with Samuel were perfunctory, as if he couldn't bear to look too closely. The unspoken tension between him and Maggie grew with each passing day. By the time Samuel was 6 months old, the strain had begun to take its toll. The medical bills were mounting, therapy appointments consumed their schedules, and Maggie felt isolated in a way she had never experienced before. Friends and family tried to be supportive, but their pity was palpable. And their advice? Have you tried this specialist? Maybe he'll grow out of it. Only deepened Maggie's sense of alienation. One particularly brutal afternoon, after a grocery store cashier had stared a little too long at Samuel's face, Maggie broke down in the car. She sobbed until her chest ached, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Samuel, oblivious, cooed softly from his car seat. Ethan found her in the kitchen that evening, her face puffy and red from crying. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice raw. "I can't live like this anymore." Ethan sat down across from her, his own eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "I don't know how to help you," he admitted. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it," Maggie said. "But you can stop pretending like you're not hurting too. We're supposed to be in this together, Ethan. I can't do it alone." The conversation marked a turning point, fragile but significant. Together they began to confront their fears and frustrations, seeking support from counselors and parent groups for children with disabilities. Slowly, they learned to advocate for Samuel, to find joy in his milestones, and to dream new dreams for their family. But the road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with challenges that tested their resilience at every turn. Over the next year, Maggie and Ethan adapted to a new normal. Their days were a carefully choreographed dance of appointments, therapies, and stolen moments of rest. Samuel's condition required frequent visits to specialists, ENTs to monitor his airway, plastic surgeons to discuss reconstructive procedures, and occupational therapists to address feeding difficulties. Every milestone came with its own set of hurdles. While other babies Samuel's age were babbling and starting to crawl, he struggled with even basic motor skills, his body working against him at every turn. One afternoon, during yet another follow-up appointment, the geneticist, Dr. Harper, addressed Maggie and Ethan with an air of practiced sensitivity. "I know it's been a tough journey," she began, her hands folded neatly on the desk, "but I want you to remember that Samuel's condition doesn't define his potential. With the right interventions, many children with Treacher Collins go on to live fulfilling lives. It's important to keep advocating for him and, more importantly, to surround yourselves with support." Maggie nodded, though her chest felt heavy. She had heard variations of this sentiment countless times, encouraging words that failed to acknowledge the enormity of what lay ahead. The truth was, no amount of therapy or medical expertise could shield Samuel from the stares, the questions, the cruelty of a world that judged people by appearances. By the time Samuel turned 2, his face was a patchwork of surgical scars, each one a testament to his resilience and the lengths Maggie and Ethan would go to for his well-being. He had undergone 2 major reconstructive surgeries, including one to correct his cleft palate and another to reshape his cheekbones. The procedures were grueling, the recoveries even more so, but Samuel endured it all with a strength that left Maggie in awe. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that weighed on the family. Social interactions became a minefield. Strangers often gawked at Samuel in public, their curiosity unfiltered and sometimes cruel. Parents pulled their children away, and whispered comments reached Maggie's ears like poison-tipped arrows. She quickly developed a thick skin, mastering the art of ignoring judgmental glances and offering icy stares of her own. But inside, each encounter chipped away at her already fragile composure. The breaking point came at a birthday party for one of Samuel's cousins. Maggie had hesitated to attend, knowing the event would be filled with other toddlers and their inevitably curious parents. But Ethan had insisted. "We can't shelter him forever," he said. "He deserves to be around other kids." The party started off innocuously enough. Samuel toddled around the backyard, clutching a balloon, while Maggie hovered nearby, her eyes darting from one group of parents to another, bracing herself for the inevitable. It didn't take long. A boy, no older than 5, pointed at Samuel and called out, "Mommy, why does that baby look so weird?" The words felt like a slap, and Maggie's heart plummeted as the boy's mother rushed over, shushing him with a mix of embarrassment and annoyance. "Don't say things like that," she scolded, casting an apologetic glance at Maggie. But the damage was done. Maggie scooped Samuel up and fled to the car, her cheeks burning with humiliation and rage. When Ethan found her later, sitting in the driveway with Samuel asleep in her arms, she didn't bother to hold back her tears. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending it doesn't hurt." Ethan knelt beside her, his own eyes glistening. "I know," he said softly, "but we have to teach him to be stronger than the world is cruel. He's going to need us to show him how." Maggie's journey to acceptance wasn't linear. There were days when she felt empowered, ready to take on the world for Samuel's sake. And there were days when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. But through it all, she clung to the belief that Samuel was more than his condition, that his spirit, his determination, and his capacity for love would shine brighter than any scar or deformity. When Samuel started preschool, Maggie was racked with anxiety. She had spent weeks meeting with the school's staff, discussing accommodations and preparing them for potential challenges. But nothing could prepare her for the sight of Samuel walking into the classroom on his first day, his small backpack hanging crookedly over his shoulders, his face alight with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. The other children stared, of course. A few whispered, and one little girl even cried, hiding behind her teacher's leg. But Samuel held his head high, his gaze unwavering, and Maggie felt a swell of pride so fierce it nearly brought her to her knees. As the weeks passed, Samuel began to make friends, children who saw past his appearance and embraced him for the kind, funny, and curious boy he was. Maggie realized that, while the world could be cruel, it could also be unexpectedly kind. For every ignorant comment or hurtful stare, there were moments of connection and understanding that reminded her why she fought so hard. But the challenges were far from over. As Samuel grew older, the complexities of navigating a world that valued perfection would only deepen. Maggie and Ethan knew they couldn't shield him from every hurtful word or prejudiced assumption. But they could arm him with the tools to face them, with courage, grace, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. And so, their story continued, one step at a time, with love as their guiding light. The years passed in a blur of triumphs and trials. By the time Samuel was 6, his personality had begun to shine in ways that far outshone his physical differences. He had a sharp wit that often left Maggie and Ethan laughing uncontrollably, and an innate curiosity about the world that led to endless questions about everything from outer space to the lives of ants. Despite the challenges he faced, Samuel carried himself with a quiet confidence that often surprised those who met him. But the world wasn't always kind, and Maggie and Ethan quickly learned that school presented its own set of hurdles. While Samuel had a small group of loyal friends who adored him, there were still children, and even some adults, who couldn't see past his face. The first major incident happened during Samuel's second grade year. Maggie had just finished her shift at the school where she taught when her phone buzzed with an incoming call from the principal of Samuel's school. "There's been an issue with Samuel," Principal Walter said, her tone measured but concerned. "I think it would be best if you came in to discuss it." Maggie's heart sank as she drove to the school, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When she arrived, she found Samuel sitting in the principal's office, his face red and blotchy from crying. He looked up at her with a mixture of relief and shame, and it took everything in Maggie not to burst into tears herself. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him. Principal Walters explained that during recess, a group of older boys had surrounded Samuel, taunting him with cruel names and mimicking his facial features. When one of them reached out to tug on his ear, Samuel had shoved the boy and yelled at them to leave him alone. The teacher on duty had intervened before things escalated further, but the incident had left Samuel shaken. Maggie listened, her emotions oscillating between heartbreak and rage. She wanted to protect her son from every cruel word, every thoughtless action, but she knew that wasn't possible. Instead, she knelt down and cupped Samuel's face in her hands. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said firmly. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." Later that evening, Maggie and Ethan sat with Samuel in his room, discussing the incident. They talked about bullying, about how some people hurt others because of their own insecurities, and about the importance of staying true to himself no matter what others said. "You're strong, Samuel," Ethan said, his voice steady. and you're not alone. We're here for you, always." Samuel nodded, but Maggie could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. She knew it would take time for him to internalize their words, to believe in his own strength. As Samuel grew older, the challenges became more nuanced. He was academically gifted, particularly in science and math, and his teachers often praised his curiosity and determination. But socially, he struggled to navigate the complexities of adolescence. The stares and whispers that had once been confined to the playground now followed him into hallways, classrooms, and social events. Maggie and Ethan did their best to prepare him for the realities of the world. They encouraged him to focus on his passions, to surround himself with people who valued him for who he was, and to never let anyone's cruelty define his worth. They also sought out mentors, adults who had faced similar challenges and could provide Samuel with guidance and inspiration. One such mentor was Dr. Elena Reyes, a renowned craniofacial surgeon who had been born with a similar condition to Samuel's. She had undergone numerous surgeries as a child and faced her share of discrimination, but she had persevered to become a leader in her field. When Maggie reached out to her, Dr. Reyes agreed to meet with Samuel. Their first meeting was transformative. Samuel listened intently as Dr. Reyes shared her story, her successes and setbacks, and the lessons she had learned along the way. "People are going to judge you," she said, her voice steady and warm. "That's their problem, not yours. What matters is how you see yourself. If you believe you're capable, strong, and worthy, then nothing anyone says can take that away from you." Those words stayed with Samuel, becoming a mantra he repeated to himself on difficult days. By the time Samuel reached high school, he had developed a resilience that was nothing short of extraordinary. He excelled in his studies, joining the robotics team and taking on leadership roles that showcased his intelligence and creativity. He also began speaking at local events, sharing his story to raise awareness about craniofacial conditions and the importance of kindness and inclusion. But even with all his accomplishments, there were moments of doubt, times when the weight of being different felt almost unbearable. One such moment came during his junior year, when he developed a crush on a girl named Emma. She was kind and funny, with a smile that lit up the room, and Samuel found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't ignore. He spent weeks debating whether to tell her how he felt, wrestling with fears of rejection and humiliation. When he finally worked up the courage, her response was gentle but firm. "I think you're amazing, Samuel," she said, her eyes sincere, "but I don't feel the same way." Samuel nodded, forcing a smile as his heart shattered. He spent the evening in his room, replaying the conversation in his mind and wondering if his appearance had played a role in her decision. When Maggie found him later, she sat beside him and wrapped him in a hug. "Rejection hurts," she said softly, "but it doesn't define you. There's someone out there who will see you for the incredible person you are, Samuel. Don't ever settle for anything less." Her words were a balm, though the ache lingered. Samuel threw himself into his passions, channeling his energy into robotics competitions and community advocacy. Over time, he began to see himself not as a victim of his condition, but as a person with a unique perspective and the power to make a difference. As Samuel approached his high school graduation, the culmination of his journey thus far felt both monumental and bittersweet. For years, he had fought to carve out a space for himself in a world that often didn't know what to do with someone like him. And now, standing on the brink of adulthood, he felt equal parts fear and excitement for what lay ahead. The graduation ceremony was a lively affair, the gymnasium packed with families holding balloons, flowers, and camera phones ready to capture the moment their children crossed the stage. Maggie and Ethan sat near the front, beaming with pride as they waited for Samuel's name to be called. When it finally was, the crowd erupted into cheers. Louder than usual, Maggie noticed with a swell of emotion. Over the years, Samuel's advocacy work and leadership in the community had earned him a reputation as someone truly extraordinary. Teachers, classmates, and neighbors all recognized the determination and kindness that set him apart. Samuel walked across the stage with his head held high, the scars on his face illuminated by the stage lights. He accepted his diploma with a confident handshake and a smile that radiated gratitude and triumph. Maggie's eyes brimmed with tears as she clapped, Ethan squeezing her hand tightly beside her. After the ceremony, the family gathered outside with a small group of Samuel's closest friends and supporters. Among them was Dr. Elena Reyes, who had become a steadfast mentor and friend to Samuel over the years. "You've come a long way," she told him, her voice filled with pride. "But this is just the beginning. The world needs more people like you, Samuel." He nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of hope and resolve. For so long, his differences had felt like a burden, something to overcome or hide. But now he saw them as a source of strength, proof of his resilience and a reminder of his purpose. That summer, Samuel prepared to leave for college. He had been accepted into a prestigious university's engineering program, where he planned to study biomedical engineering. His dream was to design medical devices that could improve the lives of children with craniofacial conditions like his own. Leaving home was a daunting prospect, but Samuel embraced the challenge with characteristic determination. Maggie and Ethan helped him pack, their goodbyes laced with the bittersweet realization that their son was no longer a little boy. "Promise me you'll call," Maggie said, her voice cracking as she hugged him tightly on move-in day. "I will," Samuel replied, his own eyes glistening. "You've done so much for me, Mom. I wouldn't be here without you and Dad." As Samuel settled into college life, he quickly found a community that valued his intellect and compassion. His professors were impressed by his innovative ideas, and his classmates admired his ability to lead with empathy. Though there were still moments of doubt and challenges to overcome, Samuel continued to grow into the person he was always meant to be. One of the most defining moments of his college career came during his junior year, when he was invited to speak at a national conference on biomedical innovation. Standing before an audience of scientists, doctors, and advocates, Samuel shared his story. How his condition had shaped his perspective and fueled his passion for creating a more inclusive world. "Growing up, I used to wonder if I would ever fit in," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "But over time, I realized that I didn't need to fit into anyone else's mold. My differences are a part of who I am, and they've given me the strength to fight for others who feel like they don't belong. Together, we can create a world where everyone is valued for who they are, not what they look like." The audience gave him a standing ovation, and Samuel left the stage feeling a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. For the first time, he truly believed that his story mattered, not just for himself, but for the countless others who might see their own struggles reflected in his journey. By the time Samuel graduated college, he had already secured a position at a leading medical technology company. His work focused on developing prosthetics and adaptive devices for children with craniofacial conditions, blending his engineering expertise with his deeply personal connection to the field. Years later, Samuel would look back on his journey with a mixture of pride and gratitude. The boy who once feared the world's judgment had become a man who challenged it, proving that resilience, compassion, and determination could overcome even the harshest obstacles. Maggie and Ethan, now in their 60s, often marveled at their son's accomplishments. But more than his professional success, they were proud of the person he had become. A man who faced adversity with grace, who turned pain into purpose, and who never stopped fighting for a world that saw the beauty in every face. Samuel's professional life flourished, but the personal challenges of living with a craniofacial condition persisted. Despite his success, the stares, whispers, and occasional cruelty from strangers never entirely disappeared. Still, Samuel had long since learned to navigate the discomfort with dignity. He often reminded himself that his journey was about more than just enduring. It was about changing perceptions, one interaction at a time. By his late 20s, Samuel had become a sought-after speaker and advocate, regularly traveling to conferences and schools to talk about the importance of inclusion and empathy. One particular event, a panel discussion for a nonprofit dedicated to supporting families of children with facial differences, turned out to be a pivotal moment in his life. As he mingled with the attendees after his talk, Samuel met Claire, a graphic designer who volunteered with the organization. She was vibrant and warm, her enthusiasm for life contagious. They struck up a conversation that stretched into hours, sharing stories about their lives, their passions, and their hopes for the future. Claire didn't look at Samuel the way so many others had. Her gaze didn't linger on his scars or search for something to pity. She saw him, truly saw him, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Over the next few months, Samuel and Claire grew closer. She admired his resilience and admired the way he turned his pain into purpose. He was drawn to her creativity, her kindness, and the way she approached life with an open heart. Their relationship wasn't without its challenges. Samuel often struggled to believe that someone as beautiful as Claire could love him for who he was. But she was patient, reminding him that he was worthy of love, just as he was. "I don't see your scars the way you think I do," she told him one evening as they sat on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "They're a part of your story, but they don't define you. What I love is the person you've become because of that story." Samuel realized then that love didn't require perfection. It only required truth. And Claire loved him not despite his scars, but because of the strength they symbolized. 2 years later, they were married in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by friends, family, and the community that had supported Samuel throughout his life. Maggie and Ethan, now grandparents to Samuel's niece and nephew, were overjoyed to see their son find the kind of happiness they had always hoped for him. Claire and Samuel built a life together filled with purpose and passion. They collaborated on projects for the nonprofit, combining her design skills with his advocacy work to create resources for families navigating the challenges of craniofacial conditions. They also started a foundation in Samuel's name, funding scholarships and medical care for children with similar diagnoses. But their most profound adventure came a few years later when they welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Elena. The moment Samuel held her in his arms, he was overwhelmed by a love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. He promised himself that he would raise her to see the world through the lens of compassion and kindness, to value people for who they were, not what they looked like. As Elena grew, she often accompanied Samuel and Claire to events and fundraisers, absorbing the values they worked so hard to instill. By the time she was old enough to understand her father's story, she was already an advocate in her own right, speaking out against bullying and championing the importance of inclusion among her peers. Samuel's legacy grew with each passing year, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. He continued to innovate in his field, designing devices that revolutionized the treatment of craniofacial conditions. But perhaps more importantly, he inspired countless individuals to embrace their differences and find strength in their struggles. On the evening of his 50th birthday, Samuel sat with Claire, Elena, and his extended family around a backyard fire pit, reflecting on the path that had brought him there. The challenges he had faced, the surgeries, the stares, the moments of despair, had shaped him, but they hadn't defined him. What defined him was the love he had given and received, the lives he had touched, and the hope he had inspired. Maggie, now gray-haired but as vibrant as ever, raised a glass in a toast. "To Samuel," she said, her voice filled with pride, "the boy who taught us all what it means to be brave, and the man who showed us how to make the world better." As laughter and cheers erupted around him, Samuel looked at the faces of the people he loved and felt a profound sense of peace. His journey had been far from easy, but it had been worth every step. And he knew, deep in his heart, that the best parts of his story were still to come. As Samuel entered his 50s, his life became a balance of continued advocacy, personal growth, and family milestones. Elena, now in her early 20s, was following in his footsteps, studying psychology with a focus on social inclusion. Watching her blossom into a compassionate, driven young woman filled Samuel with immense pride. She had inherited her parents' determination and their passion for creating a better world. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner at Samuel and Claire's home, Elena shared some exciting news. "I've been asked to give a keynote at the National Youth Inclusion Summit," she announced, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "They want me to talk about how growing up with you as my dad shaped my perspective on empathy and resilience." Samuel's chest tightened with emotion. "That's incredible, Elena," he said, his voice thick. "I'm so proud of you." Over the next few weeks, he helped her prepare for the speech, sharing anecdotes from his life and encouraging her to weave in her own experiences. When the day of the summit arrived, Samuel and Claire sat in the front row, watching with tearful pride as Elena took the stage. My dad taught me that our differences are not something to hide or overcome, Elena said, her voice steady and warm. They're what make us strong, compassionate, and uniquely capable of making a difference. He showed me that no matter how hard the world might try to define us by our challenges, we have the power to define ourselves. Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning her a standing ovation. As she stepped off the stage, Samuel enveloped her in a hug, his heart bursting with pride. "You're going to change lives, Elena," he whispered, "just like you've changed mine." Meanwhile, Samuel's work in biomedical engineering continued to make waves. His team developed a groundbreaking device that allowed children with severe craniofacial conditions to breathe and eat more easily, dramatically improving their quality of life. The invention earned him numerous accolades, including a humanitarian award that brought national attention to his work. But despite his professional success, Samuel remained deeply connected to his roots. He frequently visited hospitals and support groups, meeting with families whose children were just beginning their journeys. One such family, the Langleys, left a lasting impression on him. Their son, Liam, was born with a condition similar to Samuel's and had undergone several surgeries by the time he was 3. Meeting the boy brought back memories of Samuel's own childhood, memories of fear, pain, and uncertainty. But when he looked at Liam, he also saw hope. "You're going to do amazing things, Liam," Samuel told him, crouching to meet the boy's wide-eyed gaze. "You're stronger than you know." The encounter inspired Samuel to start a mentorship program connecting children with craniofacial conditions to adults who had walked a similar path. The initiative quickly grew, creating a network of support that spanned the globe. As Samuel approached his 60th birthday, he began to reflect on his life with a sense of gratitude and purpose. He had faced unimaginable challenges, but he had also experienced profound love, joy, and fulfillment. His scars, once a source of pain, had become symbols of his resilience and the incredible journey he had undertaken. One evening, as he sat with Claire on their porch watching the sunset, she reached for his hand. "You've done so much, Samuel," she said softly. "Not just for us, but for so many people. Do you ever think about slowing down?" He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Not yet," he replied. "There's still so much I want to do, but I couldn't have done any of it without you." They sat in comfortable silence, the years stretching out before them like an open road. Samuel knew that the challenges would never entirely disappear, but he also knew that he had built a life defined not by hardship, but by triumph. And in the quiet moments, surrounded by the love of his family and the legacy he had created, he felt an unshakable sense of peace. As Samuel moved into his 60s, his focus began to shift slightly. While he continued his work in biomedical engineering and advocacy, he started thinking more about the legacy he would leave behind, not just through his inventions and speeches, but through the people he had touched and the lives he had changed. One of his most ambitious projects yet was the establishment of the Samuel Harris Center for Resilience and Inclusion, a facility dedicated to supporting individuals with craniofacial differences and their families. The center offered everything from medical and surgical resources to psychological counseling, mentorship programs, and vocational training. Samuel envisioned it as a one-stop haven where families could find not only the practical support they needed, but also a community that celebrated their uniqueness. Fundraising for the center was no small feat, but Samuel's reputation and network of supporters made it possible. His keynote speeches drew larger audiences than ever, and several prominent philanthropists were moved to contribute after hearing his story. At the grand opening of the center, Samuel stood before a crowd of supporters, friends, and families. The building itself was a stunning testament to inclusivity, with wide-open spaces, bright, welcoming designs, and artwork created by individuals with craniofacial conditions. "This center represents more than just a building," Samuel said in his opening remarks. "It represents hope, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance to thrive. It's a place where no one has to feel alone, where every scar and every story is valued." The applause was thunderous, and as Samuel cut the ribbon with Elena and Claire by his side, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. The center was a tangible embodiment of everything he had fought for throughout his life. Samuel's health remained steady for most of his 60s, though he began to feel the wear of age. Decades of surgeries and the physical strain they had placed on his body made certain tasks more difficult, but he adapted with characteristic determination. He leaned more heavily on his team at work, mentoring younger engineers who shared his passion for making a difference. Elena, now in her late 20s, had fully stepped into her role as a social advocate. She worked closely with Samuel at the center, leading initiatives aimed at dismantling societal stigma and promoting inclusivity. Watching her thrive filled Samuel with pride, but it also allowed him to take a small step back, knowing the future of his mission was in capable hands. One winter, Samuel received an invitation to speak at an international conference on medical innovation in Switzerland. It was a prestigious event, and while he had attended many such conferences before, this one felt particularly meaningful. The organizers had dedicated an entire session to the intersection of personal experience and professional innovation, a topic Samuel had essentially written the blueprint for. As he prepared his speech, Samuel reflected on how far he had come. He thought about the little boy who had once feared the world's judgment and the young man who had faced rejection with quiet determination. He thought about the love he had found with Claire, the joy Elena had brought into their lives, and the countless people he had met along the way. When he took the stage, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience, pain, and triumph. "My life hasn't been easy," he began, his gaze sweeping over the packed auditorium. "But I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Every challenge, every scar, every cruel word, it all led me here. And what I've learned is that our greatest struggles often become our greatest strengths. They shape us into the people we're meant to be and give us the tools to make the world better." The standing ovation that followed was one of the longest Samuel had ever received. It wasn't just applause. It was an acknowledgement of a life lived with purpose and grace. In the following years, Samuel began to spend more time focusing on his personal life. He and Claire traveled more, visiting places they had long dreamed of seeing together. They spent quiet evenings at home, reminiscing about the life they had built and dreaming about the future. Samuel's 70th birthday was a grand celebration, bringing together family, friends, and colleagues from every stage of his life. Maggie and Ethan, now in their 90s, sat proudly at the head table, watching as their son delivered a heartfelt toast. "I owe so much to all of you," Samuel said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Every one of you has been a part of my story, and I wouldn't be the man I am today without your love and support. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." As the evening wound down, Samuel found a quiet moment to sit with Maggie. She held his hand, her grip surprisingly strong for her age. "You've exceeded every dream I ever had for you," she said, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You turned every challenge into a gift. I hope you know how proud I am." Samuel nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He leaned over and kissed her cheek, silently thanking her for the strength she'd given him all those years ago. And as the party continued around him, Samuel allowed himself a moment of stillness, feeling the weight of his journey and the immense gratitude that came with it. His life had been anything but ordinary, and that, he realized, was exactly what made it extraordinary.